Look closely and try to remember these logos as I'm going to turn off the ones that Paul Graham helped make.
2, 1.
That's the internet without Paul Graham. The streaming platform Twitch, the front page of the internet, Reddit, the revolution of traveling, Airbnb, and about 4,000 other big influential and smaller startups came out of this little nest, where startups grow from baby birds into bald eagles. Y Combinator is the best startup accelerator in the world. On the surface, YC seems simple enough. They provide some funding and advice to a bunch of scrappy startups. But the real impact goes way beyond that. No institution has helped entrepreneurs all around the world in the last 2 decades more than Y Combinator. And the foundation of YC is not the only glowing spot in Paul Graham's resume. When we see the important technologies he pioneered and his insanely popular writings, you'll agree it might not be even the brightest one. We know Paul Graham today as a legendary figure in tech and startups, but in many ways, he was just a curious student who wanted to follow his interests ranging from ultra creative to purely technical. For some reason, the world is not a smooth ride for people who want to taste everything. Paul was born in England in 1964, and his family moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania when he was only 4 years old. Paul's dad was a nuclear physicist and very passionate about maths, so it isn't shocking that Paul got interested in science and maths at an early age. When it came to his college years, he studied philosophy at Cornell, then got a PhD in computer science at Harvard. But his interests took an unexpected creative turn again when he then moved on to study painting at the Rhode Island School of Design and then at an art academy in Florence, Italy. He didn't like the idea of a visionary person who knows exactly where he wants to go. Instead, he believed in moving in the generally right direction and doing what is meaningful or necessary along the way. After college, Paul casually discovered a new way of distributing software that is now basically part of every website. Paul and his friend Robert Morris wanted to build software, but the problem was they hated building for Windows, which was a mess. And frankly, it still is. On the other hand, almost all the users were on Windows. So the story goes one day, like one of those scenes in the movies, Paul was lying down in his bed thinking about this problem. Suddenly, he had this amazing revelation. He thought, what if we build software for Linux and then people could interact with it through the browser by clicking on different links? That was basically the idea for the first, or some might argue, one of the first applications to run on the server and people could interact with it through the browser, a concept now known as a web app. To build the idea, he went to Robert Morris, the best programmer he knew. And he really was the best. He was a self-taught hacker. Paul says he was so good he could program as fast as he could type. Robert Morris was actually the first hacker to ever be prosecuted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986.
The FBI agent told me, like, they have these motives they look for: sex, drugs, money, revenge. Robert did it out of curiosity, and that's just like... It was just not on the list.
So, with Robert Morris on his side, they co-founded ViaWeb, a store builder that people could interact with through the browser. A month into the project, they realized they need help. So Paul asked Morris, who is the smartest person you know? And they recruited Trevor Blackwell as their first employee. Trevor disappeared right after the recruitment and showed up after 2 weeks with a rewritten version of the entire software in a new language. Paul saw him and said, hey dude, hey, just chill. We can't use this, but do this one instead. And he said, oh, okay.
Trevor has 2 modes. Oh, okay, and oh, I'm sorry.
Paul later described him as a super productive hacking monster. They grew the company together for 2 years, and in 1998, Yahoo bought the company for about $50 million worth of Yahoo shares, and it released it as the Yahoo Store. Paul received a great deal of help from Morris and Blackwell, but as it turned out, there was an unsung hero from this era that we don't even know the name. But he unknowingly planted a seed for the creation of the Y Combinator model that ironically was also copied all around the world. Paul Graham's painting teacher's husband. He was the person that provided the funding for ViaWeb, who was a lawyer and gave them $10,000 for 10% of the company, but more importantly, helped them to get incorporated and set them up as a company and taught them a bit about business. Years after the acquisition, Paul thought to himself, what a great deal for the lawyer and what a great deal for us. But he had no idea how big of a role this deal would play in his life. Anyways, the acquisition went through and Paul was now super rich, but far from done. Shortly after, he started working on arguably the most important project of his life yet, although it didn't seem like it at the time. In my early 20s, I was feeling lost, as most people do. I just knew I wanted to build something interesting and make some money out of it. On the other hand, there was always this distorted vision of a rich person in my head. I just assumed either you are a hardworking craftsman who takes pride in his work, or you're a piece of shit who worships money. So I naturally felt I don't belong. But I found someone who was super wealthy, but he didn't look like a piece of shit to me.
Who are you?
All right, Paul Graham. Pleased to meet you.
Be good. I'm not suggesting you be good in the usual sanctimonious way. I'm suggesting it because it works. It will work not just as a statement of values, but as a guide to a strategy and even a design spec for software. Don't just not be evil. Be good. He painted a version of entrepreneurship that had everything I wanted: impact, obsessive focus to solve a hard problem, money and freedom, and I soon realized I wasn't alone. This ugly ass website was receiving 25 million views per year, and it still does. He planted a seed of excitement and hope in young people's heart all around the world. He has written close to 200 long-form essays ranging from business and startup lessons to programming, personal life, and even some philosophy that are now the backbone for a lot of business and startup content online. Y Combinator itself was nothing but the synthesis of these writings. Find a burning problem and solve it. Ship before it's ready. Niche down and provide value. If you're building for everyone, you're building for no one. And hundreds of more principles that shape the startup world and even the creator economy. To be fair, these aren't all original ideas from Paul, but he played an important role to popularize them through his writings, lectures, and later on the Y Combinator startup school. The business and creative sides of Paul Graham's career are impressive, but there is also a technical side that Paul himself seems to love more. Robert and Trevor were great programmers, but Paul himself wasn't just a businessman either. ViaWeb was mostly written in Common Lisp, and before starting the project, he already had 2 books published on the language. Lisp is one of the oldest programming languages still in use. Even after the acquisition, and while he was writing essays on paulgraham.com, he made a new dialect of Lisp and called it Arc. Some of the Y Combinator internal tools, including the famous web forum and news aggregator program Hacker News, are written in Arc. At this point, from the outside, seems like Paul has it all. He has the money, the fame, and the respect of his peers both as a programmer and as a founder. But on the inside, the story is different. While speaking at Harvard Computer Society about how to start a startup, Paul was feeling guilty. He had always wanted to do some angel investing in young people, but he had never had the time. On the way home after the talk, he realized that he has had enough money to do it for 7 years now, but he hadn't started. He was also interested in working with Morris and Blackwell again. And on top of that, Jessica Livingston, his partner at the time, was looking for a job at a VC fund, but the VC was taking too long to answer. So he finally decided to act on his dream. The idea just came. He could use everything he just said about how to start a startup in his talk. He could make his dreams of investing in young people come true. He could provide a job for Jessica Livingston and work with Robert Morris and Trevor Blackwell again if they just started their own startup program together. So the legendary Y Combinator that was going to change the world started as a summer program for undergraduates in Boston, funding young ambitious people to work on interesting projects. When he was setting up a deal structure for Y Combinator, he remembered the deal they got from that lawyer for ViaWeb. As opposed to all the other incubators, they decided to invest in more companies, but with small amounts of money, an average of about $17,000 per company. Also, they tried teaching these young entrepreneurs as much as they could about business and startups, as that lawyer did for them. In the first batch alone was Sam Altman, who later became the CEO of Y Combinator and is now the CEO of OpenAI. Emmett Shear and Justin Kahn, who founded Justin.tv, now known as Twitch. Steve Hoffman and Alexis Ohanian, the founders of Reddit, which was Paul's idea. And even Aaron Stewart, known as the internet's own boy who needs his own separate video, was in the first batch. But Paul's vision stretched far beyond that first summer. His next move, although maybe an accident, was what made sure that Y Combinator stayed in the race for the next 2 decades to come. Paul moved to Silicon Valley, but not as part of a grand plan to take over the valley. In reality, he moved because after the first batch, he went to an annual hacker event called the Foo Camp and thought, the weather is so nice here, and also there are so many startups around. If someone is going to start a Y Combinator in the valley, it better be us. At first, Silicon Valley people were skeptical, but when Paul invited some of the investors in the valley to see a demo of the projects, most of them were amazed, and they saw the potential of this model with their own eyes. Y Combinator's model was so profoundly different, and it was working so much better. It showed everyone, if you planted enough seeds and provided an environment for growth, some of those seeds will inevitably grow grow to be tall, fruitful trees. YC set the model for countless other investment funds all around the world, to the point that even most governments now run programs inspired by the YC model, so they can grow their economies by giving power to young, driven, and innovative people. In 2014, Paul gave up his position as the CEO of Y Combinator to Sam Altman and said, "I'm not good at running big things, but Sam is gonna be great." In some ways, Paul Graham is a genius who has done so many influential and interesting things, it was hard to summarize them all in one video. But in some other ways, he's just a normal guy who followed his heart and worked on what he found meaningful while wearing his favorite shirt all the way.
And I see you kept the same shirt.
You know, it might well be, actually.
Is that 9 years ago?
That's
In
9
Boston?
years ago. That's the summer of 2005, yeah.